elevate this Shabbat of Hanukkah with the continuation of the celebration of our special anniversaries. This year is the 165th year that Holy Blossom Temple celebrates as the first synagogue of Toronto. It was founded by British Orthodox Jews, and by the year 1920, 100 years ago, we formally affiliated with the Reform movement. So this year we have a whole year of celebrating 100 years Reform. And every few weeks, another thought leader of the Reform movement comes to teach us. So this Shabbat, it is a special treat for me to welcome my friend, Rabbi Jonah Pesner. Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. We met in 1992, the summer of 92, in the Berkshires at the URJ Camp Eisner, and your leadership then was already apparent to all who knew you. And you've been a friend of my husband Adam forever, campers together, and your wife Dana. We miss you, and it's so good to see your face here. Let me tell everybody a little bit of who you are and why your voice is a perfect match for this Shabbat of Hanukkah. Rabbi Jonah Pesner serves as the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. The RAC, as it is called, the Religious Action Center, is the advocacy arm of the Reform movement. It is based in Washington, D.C., and you might hear that our own Rabbi Eisendrath had an important role to play in the establishment of the RAC. Under Rabbi Pesner's leadership, the RAC takes on all the core issues that are so important to the Reform movement today, advocating for healthcare justice and for racial justice, economic justice, immigration reform, LGBTQ equality, women's rights, and so on. I do urge you to make your way to the website of the Religious Action Center, and you can see some 70 issues that are at the forefront of the agenda. And Rabbi Pesner is the perfect match for this Shabbat Hanukkah because his work every day and every night is all about being that shamash and bringing greater light to North America and to all the world. Rabbi, please teach us.
Thank you, Rabbi Yael Splansky. You are a hero, a rabbi's rabbi, a prophetic voice, a liturgical innovator, and a dear friend. And being introduced by you on this occasion fills me with real honor. Let's be honest, we're not gathered in the way that we thought we might have been gathered to celebrate. Eliza, I want to say to you specifically on the occasion of your bat mitzvah, Diana, it would have been enough that you have to wear a mask. It would have been enough that your family and friends are watching at home on Facebook Live. But also now you have to endure a 20-minute sermon by some rabbi you never heard of before. So to you, Eliza, and to your family and friends, thank you for sharing and celebrating this Shabbat at Holy Blossom as we celebrate 100 years since you became a member of our beloved Reform Jewish movement. Holy Blossom is an incredibly important institution on so many levels, as the first Jewish synagogue in Canada, and then the first synagogue in the Reform Jewish movement in Canada. When you made the bold decision 100 years ago to turn to the Hebrew Union College, the seminary at which Rabbi Splansky and I were trained, the Reform institution founded by our forebears, to hire the first Reform rabbi who came to Toronto, Barnett Brickner. And the reason I invoke the name of Rabbi Brickner at this moment is you wouldn't be here without him. You wouldn't be part of our Reform Jewish movement, but I wouldn't be here either. Because when my father died, when I was 14 years old, and I was living in Lower Manhattan, and my mother became a single working mother, my synagogue and our Reform Jewish movement surrounded me and my family with comfort and with love and supported us. And my rabbinic student intern, my youth group advisor, was none other than the second Barnett Brickner, the grandson of the great Barnett Brickner. My youth group advisor, Barney Brickner, whose father was Balfour and grandfather was Barnett, not only taught and inspired and cared for me at that critical moment in my life, but he also shared with me when I was the youth group president that there was an institution in Washington called the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism that had been founded decades before. And they were going to try an experiment. Rabbi David Saperstein, the director, and my predecessor wanted to bring high school students to Washington to learn about the Jewish values of social justice, values of Reform Judaism, and then lift up their voices and hold government accountable to enduring Jewish values, to be for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. Barney Bricker brought me and my friends to the Religious Action Center in the early 1980s and set me on a course, my path to now be the director. And it is an honor and a privilege to serve as your representative for the social justice agenda for our movement. And I am keenly aware the role that Holy Blossom Temple plays, not only in Toronto, but across Canada, to say that social justice is a global concern, that we have to lift up our voices in the United States, in Canada, in Israel, and across the globe. Your teens come every year to the same Litaken seminar that changed my life some 40 plus years ago. Your students participate in our Social Justice Academy, which is tailored towards the Canadian youth experience so that young people like the incredible Camille Lisser that we heard from before can lift their voices and demand that we confront as a world the global refugee crisis, that we can demand an end to the plague of racism, which shows up in Canada and the United States and Israel and across the world, and that we can actually preserve this climate and our planet. So thank you for the role that you are playing to be a social justice leader, not only in Canada, but across the world. I'm particularly moved and honored by the incredible clergy team who we heard from throughout the morning. Rabbi Splansky, you are a liturgical innovator and a leader of our movement, not only being the face and voice of Reform Judaism in Canada, but there's no better example of that than in the Rings of Peace episode, in which you joined with the Muslim community to surround the Muslim community with protection after the mosque shooting, the tragedy in the mosque in Quebec, but also after the Tree of Life shooting, when one of your own beloved members was lost in the Tree of Life shooting, to welcome the Muslim community to create a similar circle of peace around you, and to join with the Imam and to join across lines of difference, to become the face and voice of transformation and redemption. It's of course noteworthy historically, Rabbi Splansky, that you broke the glass ceiling as a model for so many rabbis, that all things are possible regardless of your gender identity or gender expression. But the truth is, you would have been the rabbi voice, face of Judaism in Canada or wherever you are because of your incredible talent. And with Ruth Bader Ginsburg looking over my shoulder, I'm quite sure she would be proud of what you're doing. To your colleagues, Rabbi Jordan Helfman, who is our representative on the Tikkun Alum Committee of the CCRJ, the Canadian Council of Reform Judaism, and a tireless voice of social justice, partner with my own colleague, Barbara Weinstein, the director of the Commission on Social Action, and the associate director of the RAC. Together, the two of you have really helped craft a social justice agenda that is both unique to the concerns and the realities of Canadian life, but also leverage the leadership of the Canadian Jewish community, particularly around refugee resettlement and a commitment to show up for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, whether it's migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, or other folks who seek to escape the many, many forms of oppression across our globe. Rabbi Zach Goodman, whose work on Heschel couldn't be more timely or important as we discuss Judaism and social justice, Cantor David Rosen, and soloist Lindy. This was a beautiful Shabbat morning. I want to just acknowledge the incoming president of the Women for Reform Judaism, Sarah Charney. I don't know, Sarah, if you're on the Zoom or on Facebook Live, but we couldn't be more proud that the leader of our Women of Reform Judaism comes from our Canadian Jewish movement. Of course, the first nifty president from Canada, Mark Anshin. I know you're watching and I know you're going to send me an email. I've been welcomed to the Toronto Jewish community multiple times, none other than by Carolyn J. Sterling, by David Baskin and Joan Garson. So thank you all for the work that you have done to build a robust Reform Jewish movement. You play such a critical role as we reflect on 100 years of Reform Judaism in Toronto at Holy Blossom Temple. I've invoked the name of Barnett Brickner. I have to invoke the name, as Rabbi Jacobs did when he was with you some weeks ago, the name of Maurice Eisendrath. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him either, because under his presidency, having been a rabbi at Holy Blossom Temple and then have come to lead the Reformed Jewish movement as the president of the UAHC, he was the one under whom the Religious Action Center was actually founded by my predecessor, Rabbi Dick Hirsch, and inspired by Al Vorspan, the senior vice president of the URJ, a position that I now hold. You all know the iconic image of Eisendrath marching with Dr. King and holding the Torah. He was an outspoken voice for civil rights and, of course, to end the Vietnam War. It's true that King spoke in the same pulpit at Holy Blossom, to which I now speak on this Shabbat morning. So that fills me with honor. And of course, we must invoke the name of Gunter Plaut. When we talk about the Plaut commentary, my kids think that the Torah was not written by Moses, but it was written by Gunter Plaut. So again, the role that Holy Blossom has played in terms of innovating, not just in a justice perspective and a liturgical perspective, but a rigorous academic and spiritual reading of our sacred Torah commentary, our sacred tradition. Rabbi Feinberg, who was not only an advocate, an icon for civil rights and social justice, and was a kind of famous prophetic voice for the congregation, but also a tireless Zionist and a voice of condemnation of anti-Semitism and bigotry in all forms. I invoke also the names of Rabbi Marmer, Rabbi Moskowitz. Clearly, Rabbi Splansky, when you became the senior rabbi of Holy Blossom Temple, you not only made history, but you followed in the footsteps of so many greats who came before you. I've only just gotten going. My time is almost up, and all I've done is acknowledge and thank you. So let me jump right into the text. I actually want to lift up the text that Camille Lisser read from this morning, Parshat Vayeshev. Savor this text with me, folks. And he settled, and he dwelt. Jacob finally settled down. Last week in our Parsha, Jacob became Israel. After wrestling with Esau, wrestling with the blessing and the birthright, this cheater, this deceiver, finally wrestled all night with things divine, with God, with himself, with his brother, was renamed Yisrael, Israel, the one who wrestles and prevails, and is now able to settle in the land. It's such a metaphor for who we are as a Jewish community. Think about Holy Blossom Temple. In the 19th century, finally, these Jews who were moving around the globe settled in Toronto, the first Jewish community of Toronto, found a home there. We live in this perpetual tension as Jews between Artsenu, our land, the promised land, the land that was promised to Abraham and Sarah, that Jacob finally settled in, and these diaspora communities, whether it's the United States or Canada or across the world, where we also put down roots, Vayeshev, where we settle and we attempt to put down roots. There's a constant dialectic tension in the Jewish 5,000-year history of rootedness in Israel, rootedness in other lands, and what it means to both be a dispersed and sometimes expelled community, and what it is to put roots. Look at the Torah portion that Camille just read. No sooner that Jacob settles in the land, already trouble erupts. Joseph the dreamer is despised by his brothers. And what we heard Camille read was, go see to the peace of your brothers. Go see how they're doing. And what happens in our portion? You know the story. Joseph goes off to find his brothers. He finds them. They conspire. They throw him in a pit. He gets sold to Potiphar. He winds up in prison. He winds up interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh. And he winds up becoming the number 2 person in all of Egypt under Pharaoh. No longer settled in the land that was promised to his father, his grandfather, and his grandmother, but now settled in this foreign land because of the violence, the fratricide, the attempted fratricide between brothers. Again, the dialectic tension between wanting to be settled in the land, being dispersed, and being settled in another place. All of Jewish history, this move to go down to Egypt, because we know that Joseph will ultimately, when there's a famine, bring his brothers down, bring his family down, that our Hebrew ancestors will thrive in Egypt for a generation, only to then become enslaved, to have to rise up against the shackles of slavery and journey back to the promised land. Again, the dialectic tension. All of that hinges on one moment that we read in this morning's biblical text, a moment that many of you may have skated over, but I urge you, later this Shabbat afternoon, reopen your Chumash, the Plaut commentary, and look at the verses just after where Camille read, where Joseph gets lost. His father says, go find your brothers and see to their peace, and he can't find them. and he comes upon a random ish, a stranger. And the stranger says, Ma tivakesh, what are you searching for? This man doesn't know Joseph. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know why he's there. But he just says the most sacred words that any human can ask. Ma tivakesh, for what do you seek? And Joseph says, I'm trying to find my brothers. And the ish, the stranger, sends him on his way because he knows where the brothers are, and the rest is history. The commentators tell us that the entire course of Jewish history hinges on this random stranger finding Joseph, reaching out to him and asking, what are you looking for, and helping him find his way. If he doesn't guide him on his way, he doesn't find his brothers, he doesn't get sold into slavery, and the rest of Jewish history doesn't unfold the way that we know it unfolds. What is this teaching us? There's a debate between Rashi and Ibn Ezra around who this mysterious Ish was. One of our commentators tells us that the Ish was just a random person. It could have been any of us. Just like we heard Rabbi Splansky tell Eliza that any one candle, any one shamash can influence the course of another human being's life. Indeed, I would argue the whole course of human history by reaching out and asking Ma tivakesh. Any one of us at Holy Blossom Temple, any one of us in the Reformed Jewish movement, any human being created in God's image can have the effect of altering the course of a life, a family, and history. Think of the refugee families that you have resettled, from the Vietnamese boat people some 4 decades ago, to the African asylum seekers who've come through Israel, to the Syrian refugees, to the Yazidis. Any one of these refugee individuals, any one of these families could change the course of human history through the life that they will lead. And you, my beloved friends, at Holy Blossom Temple, you have been that mysterious Ish who has changed the course of their lives and of history. When we talk about doing justice and loving mercy and walking humbly with God, when we talk about being for the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the poor, the most vulnerable among us, it begins with the simple act of kindness by asking, what do you seek? And we do this not just on a personal level, but on a systemic level, which is why we couldn't be more proud of the role that Holy Blossom Temple plays in raising the voice of Reformed Judaism. It was you who some 7 years ago called out and demanded that the Reformed Jewish movement take a clearer line on First Nation, indigenous people, and for those of us in the United States, Native Americans. As we think about what it means to say Vayeshev, to be settled, to be rooted, to go from rootedness to rootlessness, to be a wandering people, to have been sojourners and wanderers, to have been slaves and oppressed, to want to be a free people in our land, to recognize the rights of, the story of, and the mistreatment of First Nation and indigenous people, to educate the wider community and to advocate. And that you sounded the alarm in 2017 at the URJ biennial to pass the resolution on the global refugee crisis. Your work at Holy Blossom Temple in resettling refugees became the paradigm across our Reformed Jewish movement. Thousands and thousands of families have been supported and cared for. And we've raised our voices in the voices of decision makers and powers, whether it's the government of Canada, the government of the United States, or the government of Israel, to advocate for the most vulnerable among us. Your work, Holy Blossom Temple, has been about Ma tivakesh. What do you seek? As now you lean into the next phase, the next chapter of the story that you are writing, and you take on the anti-racism work that you've committed to do, that you take on the work that you also committed to do through the DEI working group, that is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group. You ask Jews across all kinds of lines, Black Jews, brown Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Jews of all hues, Asian Jews, gender non-conforming Jews, LBG Jews, Jews that come in all forms, people who are not Jewish today but may be Jewish tomorrow, and you ask, Ma tivakesh, for what do you seek and for what do you yearn? And how can Holy Blossom Temple be a beacon, a home, a source of love and life and meaning for you and for your families? How can we confront racism and exclusion right here in our pews and in our congregation? And how can we advocate to end racism, bigotry, and hate in all forms across Toronto and across Canada? This is your work. This is the work that you have been doing, and this is the work that you continue to commit to doing. So let me close as our time comes to an end with one last reflection about Hanukkah. Rabbi Splansky, you magnificently taught that core teaching to Eliza and to all of us about the way in which that shamash, which can give light to all of humanity, is not diminished, is not lessened in giving of light. So let's build on that teaching and remember what Dr. King famously taught. Darkness, he said, cannot drive out darkness. Light, only light can do that. Similarly, he said, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Holy Blossom Temple, as you celebrate 100 years as a beacon of Reform Judaism, may the Reform Jewish values of your founding and your refounding continue to guide and bless you for the next 100 years, 1,000 years, or millennia, if that's what it will take to model the Ma Tivakesh. For what do you seek? For what do you yearn? With love, we are reminded no less than 36 times in our Torah that we are commanded to love, not to tolerate, not to put up with, but to love the stranger. You embody the welcome of the refugee, the widow, the orphan, the refugee, the migrant, the asylum seeker. Let your next 100 years be a paradigm as we commit to end racism, end bigotry, and end anti-Semitism, to be for an Israel, for a Canada, for a United States, and for a humanity that is about justice and mercy and love for all God's children. Amen and Mazel Tov.
Amen. And Yasher Koach, Rabbi Pesner. Amen and Yasher Koach. Amen and Yasher Koach, Rabbi Pesner, my friend, my teacher. Thank you for illuminating this festival of lights with your words of Torah. And please know that we are proud of the work of the Religious Action Center, which really is a jewel in the crown of the Reform movement under your leadership. And we are cheering for you, cheering you on, and we see ourselves very much as your partners. We take inspiration and instruction from the Religious Action Center. I believe Camille Lisser, our young Torah reader, actually attended the Litaken conference. So through what she learned there, her voice is growing stronger all the time. We hope to see you soon. Thank you again for making this anniversary extra sweet and this Hanukkah extra bright.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
May you go from strength to strength. And now it is our pleasure to call to the Bima Les Rothschild, who will bring greetings on behalf of the Temple Board. Oh, Les, we just can't quite hear you.
Got it. There we go.
Okay.